Danny Lopez had always believed that his military training had prepared him for any situation. As a decorated veteran of the U.S. Army, Danny had faced the chaos of combat zones, the sound of gunfire ringing in his ears, and the weight of life-or-death decisions. But nothing in his years of service could have prepared him for the moment when he found himself face down on the pavement of his own hometown, the cold press of a police officer's knee digging into his back. The night had started like any other. Danny had finished a long shift as a security guard and was driving home through the quiet streets of his working-class neighborhood. Exhausted but relieved to finally head home, he kept the radio low, letting the familiar hum of the engine soothe his mind. His car was an old beater, patched together from years of use, but it had never given him trouble until now. A sudden flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror shattered the calm. Confused, Danny pulled over, wondering what could have gone wrong. The officer approached with a flashlight, its beam piercing through the cracked windshield. "License and registration," the officer barked. Danny, accustomed to following orders, nodded and reached for his wallet. "I'm just getting my license," he said calmly, pulling out his military ID along with his driver's license. "I served in Afghanistan, sir. Is there a problem?" What should have been a routine traffic stop quickly spiraled out of control. The officer's demeanor shifted, his tone growing sharp and suspicious. "Hands where I can see them," he shouted. Danny froze, his training kicking in, but the confusion was written all over his face. "Sir, I'm just trying to comply," he said, his voice steady but edged with unease. Before he could explain further, he was yanked from the car, his body slammed against the hood. A split second later, he was on the ground, his cheek scraping the asphalt. From a nearby apartment balcony, a young woman began filming the encounter on her phone, her voice trembling as she narrated what was happening. "Oh my God, they're hurting him. He's not even resisting." Danny's mind raced as he tried to process what was happening. The police officer's shouts blended with the distant hum of traffic, and for the first time since his deployment, he felt powerless. This wasn't a battlefield. This was his hometown. And yet, in that moment, he wasn't Daniel Lopez, the veteran or the neighbor or the son. He was just another suspect in the eyes of the officer pinning him to the ground. Danny Lopez sat on the curb, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back, the cold metal biting into his skin. His face stung where it had scraped the asphalt, and his mind reeled, trying to process what had just happened. The officer who had thrown him to the ground was pacing nearby, radioing in his version of events. Danny could hear snippets of the call, words like non-compliance and possible threat that painted a picture far removed from the reality of what had transpired. The aftermath of the arrest. As another squad car pulled up, Danny noticed a small crowd had gathered. Among them was the young woman who had recorded the incident, her phone still in her hand. She approached cautiously as one of the newly arrived officers tried to disperse the crowd. "He wasn't doing anything wrong," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "I have it all on video." The officer glanced at her but said nothing, his expression unreadable. Danny looked up at her from where he sat, his pride bruised as much as his body. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Released without explanation. Hours later, Danny was released from the station without charges, his belongings returned in a plastic bag. The officer at the desk avoided eye contact as Danny signed the paperwork. No apology was offered, no acknowledgement of the excessive force used against him. Exhausted and aching, Danny stepped into the cool night air, unsure of how he would explain what had happened to his mother, who was waiting for him at home. When he arrived, her worried face greeted him at the door. "Mijo, what happened to you?" she asked, reaching for the scratches on his cheek. Danny hesitated, unsure of how much to share. He had always been the protector, the one who reassured her when things went wrong. But now he felt exposed, his faith in the system shaken. "It was just a misunderstanding," he said finally, brushing off her concerns. "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. The video goes viral. The next morning, Danny's phone buzzed incessantly. Friends, former military comrades, and even co-workers flooded his inbox with links to the same video, the footage from the young woman at the scene. The video had been uploaded to social media, quickly gaining traction. The caption read, "Veteran assaulted during routine traffic stop." Danny watched the video in silence, reliving the moment frame by frame. He felt a mix of anger and humiliation as he saw himself on the ground, struggling to explain himself while the officer ignored his words. The comments below the video were a mix of outrage and divisiveness. Some people expressed support for Danny, while others defended the officer's actions, claiming he was just doing his job. A community divided. As the video gained more attention, the incident became a flashpoint in Danny's community. Protests erupted outside the police station, with demonstrators holding signs that read, "Justice for Danny" and "End Police Brutality." At the same time, counter-protesters gathered, arguing that the officer had acted appropriately in a potentially dangerous situation. Danny felt caught in the middle. He hadn't asked for this attention, and while he appreciated the support, he didn't want to be the face of a movement. He just wanted to understand why it had happened, and how someone like him, a decorated veteran who had given so much to his country, could be treated as a threat in his own hometown. Seeking legal help. Encouraged by his mother and a close friend, Danny decided to seek legal advice. He met with Alicia Ramos, a well-known civil rights attorney who had taken on cases of police misconduct in the past. Sitting across from her in her modest office, Danny recounted every detail of the traffic stop, his voice steady, but filled with frustration. "They didn't even tell me why they pulled me over," he said. "I tried to comply, but it didn't matter. It's like they saw me as guilty before I even opened my mouth." Alicia nodded, taking notes. "This isn't just about you, Danny," she said. "It's about a system that treats certain people, veterans, minorities, anyone perceived as different, with suspicion instead of respect. But we can fight this." Danny wasn't sure if he wanted to fight. Part of him wanted to put the entire ordeal behind him, but another part knew that staying silent would only allow the cycle to continue. Flashbacks and PTSD. The stress of the incident began to take its toll on Danny's mental health. At night, he struggled to sleep, haunted by flashbacks not only of the traffic stop, but also of his time in combat. The officer's shouts echoed in his mind, blending with the memories of commands barked on the battlefield. He felt a crushing sense of vulnerability, a stark contrast to the confidence he'd once carried as a soldier. During one particularly restless night, Danny attended a veterans support group at the urging of a friend. Sharing his experience with others who understood the weight of PTSD brought a small sense of relief. One veteran, an older man named Frank, pulled Danny aside after the meeting. "You've been through hell, kid," Frank said, his weathered face stern but kind. "But this, what happened to you, it's not just your fight, it's ours. You speak up, you're speaking for all of us who've been treated like we don't belong." Standing up. Emboldened by the support of the veteran community and his lawyer, Danny agreed to speak publicly about his experience. At a town hall meeting organized by local activists, he stood in front of a packed room, his hands trembling as he held the microphone. "I served this country because I believed in justice, in protecting the rights of everyone," he began. "But when I came home, I realized those rights aren't guaranteed, not for everyone. What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone." The room erupted in applause, and for the first time since the incident, Danny felt a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about seeking justice for himself, it was about creating change for others. Legal and personal battles. As the lawsuit against the police department moved forward, Danny faced intense scrutiny. The officer involved claimed Danny had been non-compliant and acted suspiciously. But Alicia dismantled these arguments with the help of the video footage and witness testimonies. Meanwhile, Danny continued to work through his PTSD, attending therapy sessions and leaning on the support of his mother and the veteran community. Slowly, he began to rebuild his confidence, though the scars of the incident remained. Months after the incident, Danny Lopez stood in the courthouse hallway, his heart pounding as he waited for the verdict in his case against the police department. The journey to this moment had been grueling. He had faced public scrutiny, relived his trauma countless times in interviews and depositions, and battled his own doubts about whether seeking justice was worth the cost. Yet, as he looked around at the people who had supported him, his mother, his attorney Alicia, and a handful of veterans who had stood by him through it all, he knew he had made the right choice. A step toward justice. When the jury returned, their decision was clear. The officer involved was found liable for using excessive force, and the police department was ordered to implement reforms, including mandatory de-escalation training and better protocols for interacting with individuals experiencing PTSD. Additionally, Danny was awarded damages for his physical and emotional suffering, a small but significant acknowledgement of the harm he had endured. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the judge read the verdict, but Danny remained quiet, his emotions swirling. It wasn't about the money. It was about holding the system accountable and ensuring no one else would have to experience what he did. Outside, reporters crowded around, microphones thrust toward him. Danny took a deep breath and spoke, his voice steady but firm. "This isn't just about me," he said. "It's about all the people who've been silenced, mistreated, or ignored. Justice isn't just something we say, it's something we fight for, something we demand. Today is a step in the right direction, but the fight doesn't end here." Healing and advocacy. In the months that followed, Danny dedicated himself to healing and advocacy. He became a regular speaker at veterans events, sharing his story to raise awareness about the challenges many face when reintegrating into civilian life. He also partnered with local organizations to push for police reform, lending his voice to campaigns for accountability and better training. At home, Danny worked to rebuild his sense of normalcy. Therapy sessions became a lifeline, helping him manage his PTSD and regain confidence. His mother, always his rock, saw the light return to his eyes and the strength return to his voice. Looking forward. One afternoon, Danny stood at a podium during a community forum, addressing a room full of veterans, police officers, and community leaders. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he said, "but every step we take, every conversation, every reform, brings us closer to a system that works for everyone." As the crowd applauded, Danny felt a sense of closure. His fight wasn't over, but he had turned his pain into purpose, and that, he realized, was the greatest victory of all.